Commander Sarah Mitchell's emerald eyes remained fixed on the pitch-black horizon as the military transport cut through the midnight sky. The C-130 Hercules hummed with a mechanical rhythm that most soldiers found unsettling, but to Sarah, it was a lullaby, the sound of purpose, of duty, of another mission that would change lives. Her calloused fingers rested with perfect stillness on the assault rifle across her lap, the weapon and extension of her body after 15 years of service. The metal was cold, reassuring, familiar in a way that few things in her life had ever been. Around her, 5 other operators shifted nervously in their seats, checking equipment for what felt like the 100th time that night. Martinez kept running his thumb over the magazines stacked in his tactical vest, counting them obsessively. Johnson whispered what sounded like a prayer under his breath. Though he was technically an atheist, fear had a way of making believers out of everyone. Rodriguez, the youngest of the group at just 23, kept adjusting his night vision goggles, his leg bouncing with anxious energy. Thompson and Williams sat side by side, playing a silent game of chess in their minds, using an imaginary board to distract themselves from the weight of what lay ahead. But Sarah, she sat like a statue carved from ancient stone, unmovable and eternal. Her heart rate was a perfect 60 beats per minute. She could feel it, monitor it, control it with the same precision that a master musician controls an instrument. No one on this aircraft knew the truth about the quiet woman in the corner of the cargo hold, sitting in the shadows where the red emergency lighting cast everything in a crimson hue that looked like blood. No one fully understood that the woman they'd been briefed to follow was about to execute one of the most dangerous missions in Pentagon history. Her reputation preceded her in whispers and rumors. Iron Fist. The name alone made seasoned veterans of 20 years sweat through their shirts. What most of them didn't know, what the Pentagon had deliberately kept classified at the highest levels, was that Iron Fist had a face, a story, and an extraordinary amount of something to prove that particular night. Sarah's mind wasn't wandering through anxiety like her teammates. Instead, she was performing what she called the walkthrough, a mental visualization technique she developed over years of intensive training. In her mind's eye, she was already at the compound. She could see every corridor, every window, every potential hiding spot. She'd memorized the blueprints 3 weeks ago, studied satellite imagery until she could navigate the building blindfolded, and run through tactical scenarios 1,000 times until her responses became pure instinct. The human brain, she'd learned, couldn't distinguish between vivid imagination and actual experience when it came to muscle memory and tactical preparation. So in a very real sense, she'd already completed this mission 1,000 times. The aircraft hit a pocket of turbulence, and the entire cargo hold lurched. Most of the operators grabbed onto the netting beside them, their bodies tense with the sudden movement. Sarah didn't flinch. Her body had been trained to anticipate shifts in gravity, to adjust without conscious thought. She simply shifted her weight by 3 millimeters and remained perfectly centered, perfectly calm. Rodriguez, the young operator, glanced over at her. She caught his eye for just a fraction of a second. His pupils were dilated with fear and adrenaline. She gave him the smallest nod, imperceptible to anyone not looking directly at her, but it was enough. It said, "I trust you. You're ready. We're going to be fine." Rodriguez straightened his spine slightly, and his legs stopped bouncing. That was the power Sarah carried without saying a word. The truth about Sarah Mitchell was complicated and beautiful and tragic in ways she rarely allowed herself to contemplate. As a girl growing up in rural Pennsylvania, her father had told her countless times that she'd never be strong enough for the military. Her mother had worried constantly, not about her capability, but about whether the military would even accept her. When she was 16, she'd started running 5 miles every morning before school. By 18, she could do more push-ups than most of the boys in her class. At 22, she'd walked into a Navy SEAL recruitment office and met with nothing but skepticism and dismissal. But Sarah had learned something crucial in her childhood. The people who doubt you are usually just afraid. They're afraid of what it means if you succeed, because it challenges their understanding of the world. So she'd trained harder. She'd pushed further. She'd studied the tactical manuals and weapon systems and military history until she could speak about it with the fluency of a veteran twice her age. When she'd finally been accepted into SEAL training, she'd been placed in a class with 140 men and 0 women. The attrition rate was brutal. By the end of basic underwater demolition SEAL training, only 18 men remained. Sarah was still standing. The looks she'd gotten from senior operators in those early days, the mixture of skepticism, resentment, and barely concealed hostility, had only made her more determined. She'd proved herself over and over again, not with words but with actions. She'd volunteered for the missions no one else wanted. She'd trained in conditions that tested the absolute limits of human endurance. She'd made decisions under fire that had saved lives. And slowly, grudgingly, the resistance had transformed into respect. The call sign Iron Fist had come during a hand-to-hand combat tournament 7 years ago. Sarah had entered at the insistence of her commanding officer, who thought it would be good for team morale and also good for shutting up the few remaining skeptics. She'd fought 12 opponents that day, 12 trained killers, and she'd beaten every single one of them, sometimes with moves that seemed physically impossible given her body weight and leverage. By the final match, the entire base had crowded around to watch. When the last opponent, a man named Hawkins who'd served 4 tours in Iraq, conceded after Sarah had him in a choke hold he couldn't escape, the crowd had erupted. Someone had shouted, "That's Iron Fist right there," and the name had stuck. Now, sitting in this aircraft at 2:47 in the morning, Sarah was acutely aware that this mission might be the one that defined her entire career. Malik was the world's most wanted terrorist. He'd orchestrated attacks that had killed thousands of civilians. The intelligence community had been hunting him for 7 years without success. And now, finally, they had a confirmed location. But the complexity of the operation meant unprecedented coordination between her team and Navy fighter pilots. That coordination had never been tested at this level before. A single miscommunication could result in catastrophic failure. Sarah's eyes shifted slightly, taking in each member of her team. Rodriguez was ready. She could see it in how he was breathing now, slower, more controlled. Martinez had stopped counting his magazines and was instead mentally preparing himself, his eyes closed. Johnson had finished his prayer and was now in that meditative state that came right before action. Thompson and Williams had abandoned their mental chess game and were now simply existing in the moment, fully present. The radio crackled softly in her earpiece, a sound so subtle that the other operators wouldn't have heard it, but Sarah had trained her auditory system to pick up frequencies most humans couldn't consciously perceive. The voice of the command center came through, calm and measured. "All teams, this is command. ETA to drop zone is 12 minutes. Final comms check in progress." Sarah keyed her radio with the slightest pressure of her finger. "Iron Fist operational, all parameters green, team is locked and loaded, ready to proceed." As the words left her mouth, she felt something shift inside her chest. It wasn't fear, it wasn't doubt. It was the ancient instinct of a hunter recognizing that the hunt was finally about to begin. Around her, the 5 operators sensed the change in her energy. They straightened. They checked their weapons one final time. They prepared themselves mentally for what came next. Through the small window near her seat, Sarah could see the Afghan mountains rising up like dark shadows against the slightly less dark sky. They were close now. The terrain below was hostile, unforgiving, filled with enemies who would kill them without hesitation. In less than 20 minutes, she and her team would be jumping into the darkness, descending toward one of the most dangerous compounds on the planet, to capture or eliminate a man who'd evaded the world's greatest military for nearly a decade. And Sarah Mitchell, the girl whom her father had said would never be strong enough, sat perfectly calm, her heart rate exactly 60 beats per minute, ready to make history. The aircraft began its descent. 12 hours before Sarah sat in the C-130 Hercules with her team, She had been summoned to a place that didn't officially exist. The underground bunker was located 3 levels beneath Naval Base San Diego, accessible only through a series of security checkpoints that grew progressively more stringent the deeper one descended. The walls were reinforced concrete, lined with electromagnetic shielding to prevent any signal from escaping or entering. It was a room designed to hold the most classified conversations the United States government conducted outside of the White House itself. When Sarah received the summons at 600 hours that morning, she'd been in the middle of a training session with her team, running scenario simulations for a hypothetical operation in the Persian Gulf. Her commanding officer, Admiral Kenneth Pierce, had pulled her aside without explanation and handed her a red folder marked with a single stamp, EYES only, POTUS level clearance. The moment she saw that designation, she knew this was different from anything she'd experienced before. In her 15 years of service, she'd never handled a document with that level of classification. The drive from her quarters to the secure facility took exactly 47 minutes. Sarah sat in the back of a nondescript black sedan, the red folder resting on her lap, her mind already running through possibilities. Malik. It had to be Malik. There was no other target significant enough to warrant this level of urgency. Malik was the ghost that had haunted the Pentagon for 7 years, a terrorist so skilled at disappearing that some officials had begun to question whether he even existed anymore. Sightings in Yemen confirmed intelligence from Pakistan, a satellite image from 3 weeks ago in Afghanistan that had never been officially confirmed. But nothing concrete, nothing actionable. The bunker's entrance was unmarked, hidden behind a maintenance door that looked deliberately decrepit. The security guards didn't even make eye contact as Sarah was escorted through. She'd been down here twice before, both times for classified briefings on operations that were now considered closed files in the vaults above. But the atmosphere today felt different. There was a tension in the air, a sense of urgency that made even the usually stoic Marine standing guard seem slightly more alert than normal. The briefing room was smaller than she'd expected. A rectangular table, polished black marble, monitors on 3 walls, and sitting around that table were people whose faces she'd only ever seen in official government photos or news broadcasts. A 3-star general whose name she recognized as General Harold Westbrook, the deputy commander of U.S. Central Command. 2 CIA directors, one she recognized, one she didn't. And sitting at the head of the table, looking like he'd had maybe 2 hours of sleep in the past week, was Deputy Secretary of Defense James Morrison. These were people who made decisions that affected millions, and they wanted to talk to her. General Westbrook gestured for her to sit. "Commander Mitchell, thank you for coming on such short notice. What we're about to discuss doesn't leave this room, not to your commanding officer, not to your team, not to anyone. Do you understand?" Sarah nodded. She'd signed enough classified briefing forms to understand the gravity of the moment. "Understood, sir." "Hassan Malik," the CIA director said, sliding a photograph across the table. It was the most recent image they had, taken 3 weeks ago from a satellite camera positioned over the Kunar province in eastern Afghanistan. The man in the photograph had dark eyes that seemed to contain an ancient darkness, a face weathered by years of conflict and hiding. "We've confirmed his location. For the first time in 7 years, we know exactly where he is." Sarah's pulse quickened, but her expression remained neutral. This was what every operator dreamed of, the chance to eliminate the target that had cost so many lives. "The location is a compound approximately 40 kilometers from the Pakistani border," another CIA official continued. "We believe he's been using it as a hub for coordinating operations across 3 continents. We have intelligence suggesting that chemical weapons components are being manufactured there. Biological agents are being developed. This isn't just a terrorist hideout. This is a weapons factory." The Deputy Secretary of Defense leaned forward, his tired eyes fixing on Sarah. "Commander, we need your assessment. is a SEAL team capable of executing a direct assault on this compound with a reasonable expectation of success. This was the moment where Sarah's training transcended physical capability and entered the realm of pure tactical analysis. She'd spent the previous 40 minutes in the sedan memorizing the location coordinates, the elevation data, the geological information. Now, she closed her eyes for just a moment, and the compound materialized in her mind. "Sir, I would need to see the satellite imagery and the most recent intelligence reports," Sarah said carefully. "But preliminary assessment suggests a team of 6 could execute a successful assault if we have proper air support and intelligence regarding the internal layout." "What kind of air support?" General Westbrook asked. "Naval air support, FA-18s," Sarah replied without hesitation. "We'd need real-time coordination, ground-to-air communication with pilots who could provide surveillance and close air support if the situation deteriorated." There was a moment of silence. The 3 CIA officials exchanged glances. Then the one whose face she didn't recognize spoke. "That's exactly what we were hoping to hear. Because we're not just asking you to plan this operation, Commander. We're asking you to lead it." Sarah's hands didn't shake. Her breathing didn't change. But inside, something shifted. This was bigger than anything she'd done before. This was the kind of operation that would be studied in military academies for decades. This was the kind of mission that would either cement her legacy or end her career in disgrace. "When?" she asked. 72 hours from now," the deputy secretary said. "We've been waiting for the perfect operational window. The weather patterns suggest we have a 48-hour window starting tomorrow night. After that, monsoon season begins, and the window closes for potentially 6 months. We can't wait that long. Intelligence suggests Malik will evacuate the compound within the week anyway. He has sources inside the Afghan government who are beginning to close in." Sarah absorbed this information, processing it through the tactical framework she'd built over years of training. 72 hours to prepare a team. 72 hours to coordinate with naval aviation. 72 hours to plan an operation that would either succeed spectacularly or fail catastrophically. "Commander," General Westbrook said, and there was something in his voice that suggested he was about to say something he didn't want to say. "There's one more thing you need to understand. This operation, if successful, is going to attract a lot of attention. There will be people in this government who will try to use it for political purposes. There will be people in the media who will try to make you into a symbol of something. And there will be people, powerful people, who will resent what it means that you're the one leading this operation." Sarah understood what he was saying without him having to spell it out. She was a woman commanding a SEAL team on the most high-profile operation in 5 years. That fact alone would be controversial in certain circles. The Secretary of Defense continued, "Your identity will remain classified at the highest levels. No one outside of this room and your commanding officer will know who led this operation. The credit will go to your team. It will go to the pilots, but it will not go to you. Can you accept that?" Sarah looked around the table at these powerful men and women who were, in their own way, asking her to sacrifice recognition for duty. It was the inverse of what most people struggled with. Most people wanted credit. Most people wanted their names in history books. But Sarah had never been motivated by glory. She'd been motivated by the simple, pure desire to be excellent at what she did. "Sir, ma'am," Sarah said, looking at each of them in turn, "I don't need recognition. I need the operation to succeed. I need Malik captured or eliminated. And I need my team to come home alive. Everything else is secondary." The deputy secretary nodded slowly. "Then we have our operation commander. You leave for San Diego in 2 hours. Admiral Pierce will provide you with everything you need. The pilots of Eagle Squadron are standing by for coordination briefings. And Commander, don't fail. Not because of what failure means politically, but because failure means we'll be hunting this man for another 7 years while he continues to kill people." As Sarah stood to leave, General Westbrook handed her another red folder. Your tactical briefing, the compound layouts, satellite imagery, intelligence reports. Memorize everything but don't take notes. Burn it in your mind, then destroy the documents. Sarah walked out of the briefing room, her mind already 10 steps ahead, already beginning the choreography of one of the most dangerous operations in modern military history. She had 72 hours to prepare her team, coordinate with naval aviation, and plan an assault on a fortress compound filled with world-class terrorists. As she climbed the stairs out of the bunker, she allowed herself exactly 5 seconds to think about her family, her mother in Pennsylvania, her sister in California, the friends who had no idea what she actually did for a living. Then she locked those thoughts away in the vault where she kept all personal emotions during operational planning. There was work to be done, history to be made, and a man named Hassan Malik who was going to learn that Iron Fist was a force that even he couldn't hide from. Inside the cargo hold of the C-130 Hercules, Sarah Mitchell's mind had transformed into something beyond human consciousness. She called it the walkthrough, a mental visualization technique that she developed over years of intensive training and refined through consultation with sports psychologists, military strategists, and specialists in peak performance. But what it really was, in its essence, was the ability to exist in 2 places at once, physically in the aircraft with her team and mentally already at the objective, executing the operation with perfect clarity. Her eyes were open, staring out into the darkness visible through the small window near her seat, but she was seeing something entirely different. In her mind's eye, she was already descending toward Hassan Malik's compound. She could visualize every corridor of the building with photographic precision, every window marked with a tactical designation, every potential hiding spot labeled with probability assessments based on 3 weeks of intelligence analysis. Her spatial memory, honed through years of specialized training, had converted the 2-dimensional satellite imagery and 3-dimensional architectural blueprints into a fully realized mental model that she could navigate as easily as she could walk through her own home. Around her, the 5 operators were engaging in their own pre-mission rituals, each one unique, each one a coping mechanism designed to manage the neurochemical cascade of fear and adrenaline that flooded the human body before combat. Martinez was still running his thumb across the magazines in his tactical vest, a repetitive motion that activated the part of his brain responsible for procedural memory. Every time he touched those magazines, his neural pathways were reinforcing the sequence of actions he'd need to perform when he reached for ammunition. Johnson's whispered prayer was more sophisticated than simple religious devotion. It was a form of guided visualization combined with what neuroscientists called positive self-talk. By repeating affirmations under his breath, he was literally rewiring the neural networks in his prefrontal cortex to believe in his own capability and competence. Rodriguez, the youngest of the team, represented the raw energy that youth brought to military operations. His leg bouncing wasn't a sign of weakness or insufficient training. It was actually a sophisticated physiological response. His body was burning excess cortisol, managing the stress hormone through constant micro-movements that kept his sympathetic nervous system from becoming completely overwhelmed. Thompson and Williams, playing their silent chess game, were engaging in what psychologists called cognitive compartmentalization. By focusing their conscious mind on something abstract and removed from the mission, they were allowing their unconscious mind to process the fear and danger in the background. But Sarah existed in a category beyond all of these coping mechanisms. She didn't manage her fear the way other operators did, because she had trained herself to experience fear differently. Fear, in its most basic form, was simply adrenaline combined with uncertainty. Most people feared the unknown, feared variables they couldn't control. Sarah had eliminated most of the unknown through obsessive preparation. She'd studied the compound so intensely that she could navigate it in complete darkness. She'd run through tactical scenarios 1,000 times, Not an exaggeration. Literally 1,000 documented scenarios in her training logs, until every possible variable had been anticipated and a response protocol had been established. The human brain couldn't distinguish between vivid imagination and actual experience when it came to creating muscle memory and establishing neural pathways for complex motor sequences. This was a neurological fact that had been proven by countless studies in sports psychology and military training. When Sarah visualized herself breaching the main corridor, subduing sentries, and navigating toward the target, her neural pathways were literally practicing the movements. Her muscles were receiving signals from her brain that mimicked actual execution. By the time her body performed these actions in reality, they wouldn't be new experiences. They would be practiced, refined, perfected in her mind 1,000 times before. Her heart rate remained at exactly 60 beats per minute. She could feel it, monitor it the way a meditation master could monitor their own breathing. This wasn't something she did consciously anymore. It was automatic, a physiological response that had been trained into her nervous system over 15 years of intensive conditioning. In the early days of her career, maintaining that calm had required conscious effort. She'd had to breathe deliberately, had to count her heartbeats, had to use every trick in the neuroscience toolkit to keep her physiology under control. But after thousands of training scenarios, after dozens of actual combat operations, her nervous system had learned. It had adapted. It had become something superhuman in its capability to remain centered while surrounded by chaos and danger. The aircraft hit another pocket of turbulence, and the cargo hold lurched violently. Loose equipment rattled in the netting. Several operators grabbed for stability. Sarah didn't flinch because her mind had already anticipated the turbulence. She'd reviewed the meteorological data for this flight path, knew that at this altitude and latitude, there would be 3 points of significant turbulence. Her body had already braced itself microscopically for the first one, and now for the second, it simply shifted 3 millimeters to maintain perfect balance. Rodriguez glanced over at her and she saw the question in his eyes, the universal question of a younger soldier. Are you scared? Am I going to die on this mission? Will I ever see my family again? Sarah had looked into those same terrified eyes 100 times, seen the same doubt reflected back at her. And she'd learned that the most powerful gift she could give her team wasn't false reassurance or empty platitudes. It was genuine confidence, because confidence was contagious. It passed from person to person like a virus, but instead of destroying the immune system, it reinforced the mental fortitude. She gave Rodriguez the smallest nod, a gesture so subtle that no one else on the aircraft would have noticed it. It was a nod that carried within it 15 years of military service, dozens of successful operations, combat experience in 5 countries, and the absolute certainty that she would protect every single person on her team. Rodriguez straightened slightly, and she saw his breathing slow. The bouncing of his leg decreased in frequency. He wasn't suddenly fearless. Fear was adaptive. Fear kept you alive. But he'd moved from panic to manageable adrenaline. That nod had cost Sarah nothing, but it had potentially saved Rodriguez's life by shifting his neurochemical state from catastrophic anxiety to focused alertness. The truth about Sarah Mitchell was that she'd built herself into something beyond the typical constraints of human psychology. Her childhood in rural Pennsylvania had been a crucible. Her father, a coal miner with traditional views about gender and capability, had spent years telling her that she was too weak, too small, too fragile for meaningful work. He'd meant it as motivation, in his own twisted way. He'd believed that adversity built character. Instead, it had built something else, an unshakable belief in her own capability, combined with a fundamental drive to prove that the limitations people placed on her were nothing but illusions constructed by their own fear. By the time she was 18, she'd been running 5 miles every morning before school for 3 consecutive years. By 22, she could execute one-handed pull-ups with the same ease that most people used both hands. Her mind had been trained through meditation, visualization, and deliberate practice to achieve states of consciousness that most humans never experienced. When she'd walked into that Navy SEAL recruitment office, she hadn't been hopping to join the military. She'd been walking toward her destiny. The early days of SEAL training had been designed to break people. The instructors had thrown obstacles at her that seemed impossible: hypothermia training in Arctic water, sleep deprivation lasting 96 hours, carrying a log that weighed more than her entire body weight while running through sand. But Sarah had discovered something profound. Once you decided that you were willing to die for your mission, everything else became negotiable. Pain became data. Fear became information. Fatigue became just another variable to manage. She'd proven herself 1,000 times over, and slowly, the skepticism of the male operators had transformed into grudging respect. She'd earned the call sign Iron Fist by literally beating a man named Hawkins who'd served 4 tours in Iraq in hand-to-hand combat. She'd achieved a perfect record on tactical operations. She'd made decisions under fire that had saved lives. Now, sitting in this aircraft with her team, Sarah existed in that space between preparation and execution. Her mind was a perfectly sharpened blade. Her body was a finely tuned instrument. Her spirit was aligned with purpose. The radio crackled in her earpiece. All teams, ETA to drop zone is now 8 minutes. Final weapons check. Confirm all personnel ready. Sarah keyed her microphone. Iron Fist team, all weapons check complete, all personnel locked and loaded, ready for operation. As the words left her mouth, she felt every operator on the aircraft straighten. They'd been waiting for her confirmation. They'd been waiting for the signal that it was time to cross from the realm of preparation into the realm of action. Rodriguez adjusted his night vision goggles one final time. Martinez stopped counting his magazines. Johnson opened his eyes. Thompson and Williams abandoned their mental chess game. Everyone knew what came next. In less than 10 minutes, they would jump into darkness over hostile territory. And Sarah Mitchell would begin the operation that would either define her legacy or end her career. The aircraft began its final descent toward the drop zone. The moment the rear ramp of the C-130 Hercules began to descend, the sound changed from the mechanical hum of transport to something raw and primal. Wind howled through the cargo hold like a living thing, a force that seemed to want to tear the aircraft apart. The temperature dropped precipitously. Cold air rushed in, carrying with it the scent of the Afghan night, dust, stone, and something else that Sarah recognized as danger. The red emergency lighting had been switched off, replaced by complete darkness. The only illumination came from the small indicator lights on their tactical gear and the barely perceptible glow of the stars above, visible through the open ramp. Sarah stood first, moving to the edge of the ramp with a fluid grace that suggested she was simply walking through her living room rather than preparing to jump from an aircraft moving at 120 miles per hour over hostile territory. Her parachute was secured to her back, a rectangular bundle of nylon and cord that represented the thin margin between safe insertion and catastrophic failure. She jumped 847 times in her career. This would be jump 848. The number meant nothing. What mattered was that every single jump required the same level of focus and precision as the first one. Behind her, Rodriguez moved into position. Then Martinez. Then Johnson, Thompson, and Williams. The 5 operators lined up like a synchronized swimming team, each one precisely 2 meters behind the last, their bodies aligned with the geometric perfection that came from hundreds of hours of training. This particular insertion pattern, the spacing, the timing, the precise angle of exit, had been calculated by the air operations team to maximize their chances of landing within a tight cluster, while minimizing the risk of entanglement or collision during the descent. Sarah's hand rose, a gesture that needed no words. The jumpmaster, a sergeant with 30 years of airborne experience, tapped her shoulder. That single tap meant, "Go, go, go," Without hesitation, without the slightest hesitation, Sarah Mitchell stepped off the edge of the aircraft into the void. For the first 0.3 seconds, she was in free fall. Her body dropped through the darkness like a stone, accelerating at 32 feet per second squared. The force of the wind resistance immediately became tremendous, pulling at her gear, trying to destabilize her body position. But Sarah had trained for this moment thousands of times. Her body automatically assumed the correct position, head slightly up, arms tucked, legs straight but slightly bent at the knees. The parachute above her expanded with a violent jerk that would have dislocated a normal person's shoulders. But Sarah's muscles were prepared for this specific impact. She'd spent years doing isometric exercises designed to strengthen the specific muscle groups that bore the load during parachute deployment. The canopy opened with a sound like thunder, and suddenly the world became silent. The wind roar ceased. The aircraft noise disappeared. There was only the soft whistling of air moving through the parachute fabric and the faint creaking of harness straps bearing her weight. Below her, the Afghan landscape unfolded like a vast, living map. She could see the compound, a dark, geometric shape against the slightly less dark background of the terrain. She could see the mountains in the distance, their silhouettes visible against the star-filled sky. She could see the valley where they would land, the rocky terrain that would be unforgiving if anyone made a mistake. Rodriguez's parachute had deployed perfectly. She could see his canopy above and slightly to the left of her position. Martinez was tracking slightly too far to the east. He'd need to use his front slip technique to correct his trajectory. Sarah had already anticipated this. She'd watched Martinez during training and knew that he had a tendency to drift eastward in night operations. The correction would come naturally to him once he was focused. Johnson and Thompson were maintaining proper spacing. Williams, the most experienced jumper on the team after Sarah, was executing a textbook descent profile. Sarah's hands moved to her steering toggles, and she adjusted her descent trajectory with minute corrections. She wasn't trying to land at the same spot as the others. That would create a collision hazard. Instead, she was positioning herself to land at Point Delta, approximately 200 meters south of where Rodriguez would touch down. From there, she would guide the team to Point Omega, the rally point where they would reconstitute as a unified tactical unit before proceeding toward the compound. The ground rose up to meet her with surprising speed. This was always the most dangerous moment. The final 30 seconds of descent when a parachute malfunction or a sudden gust of wind could mean a fatal impact. Sarah's feet extended downward, her muscles tensing in preparation for contact. The rocky terrain below was unforgiving and full of obstacles, boulders, ravines, crevasses. One wrong landing could mean a broken ankle, and a broken ankle would mean extraction, which would mean mission failure. But Sarah didn't think about failure. Her mind was already calculating the impact, the angle, the force distribution, the specific sequence of muscle contractions that would absorb the shock and protect her spine and joints. Her boots touched ground, and she instantly executed the perfect parachute landing fall, her body rolling laterally to distribute the impact across her strongest muscle groups. She hit hard, harder than she'd anticipated, but her training took over. She rolled, controlled the momentum, and came up in a crouched position with her assault rifle already in her hands, ready for immediate action. Around her, the Afghan night was suddenly filled with sound. Rodriguez hit ground 50 meters away, his landing clean but slightly less controlled than Sarah's. Martinez landed badly, his right foot catching on a rock, but he recovered quickly. Johnson and Thompson executed textbook landings. Williams came down 30 meters to the north, his parachute catching on a boulder but immediately releasing as he rolled away from it. There were no words, no verbal communication. They'd trained for this moment 100 times. Each operator immediately began the process of disconnecting from their parachute harness and securing it in the concealment pouch designed specifically for this purpose. Parachutes left behind could be captured and analyzed by enemies. Every piece of equipment that left a trace of their presence was a potential intelligence leak. The team had exactly 90 seconds to secure their gear, establish a secure perimeter, and move to the rally point. Sarah's hands worked with mechanical efficiency. The harness release took 4 seconds. The parachute canopy was bundled and secured in 8 seconds. She moved it behind a rock formation that would conceal it from casual observation. Rodriguez was already moving toward the rally point, his rifle up, his eyes scanning for threats. Martinez followed, maintaining proper spacing. Johnson came next, then Thompson and Williams. The movement toward Point Omega was executed in absolute silence. They moved like ghosts, their footfalls barely audible even to each other. Sarah brought up the rear, her rifle up and ready, her eyes constantly scanning the darkness behind them for signs of pursuit or surveillance. The intelligence had indicated that the compound was approximately 7.3 kilometers away, positioned in a valley that would provide tactical advantage to defenders. But the terrain also offered concealment to an attacking force that understood how to use it. As they moved through the Afghan mountains, Sarah performed the mental map rotation that she'd done 1,000 times in training. The satellite imagery transformed in her mind. The aerial perspectives shifted to ground-level perspectives. She could see the valley not as it appeared from above, but as it would appear when they approached it from ground level. She could anticipate the obstacles they would encounter, could predict where the temperature would drop and where wind currents would shift. This mental processing happened simultaneously with her monitoring of her team's condition, her assessment of potential threats, and her continuous evaluation of their position relative to the objective. By the time they reached Point Omega, a concealed position in the rocks above the compound, Sarah had led them through 12 kilometers of hostile terrain without a single mistake. Her GPS unit showed that they were within 15 meters of the exact location she'd planned. The time was 2:31 a.m. They had exactly 16 minutes before the air support would begin its synchronized coordination with the ground team. Sarah signaled her team to establish defensive positions around the perimeter. Each operator immediately understood their role and moved into position with practiced efficiency. They would wait here, watching the compound, monitoring for any changes in security posture until the moment came to strike. Sarah settled into her firing position, her rifle resting on a rock, her sight line providing perfect coverage of the main entrance to the compound. Around her, the Afghan night was absolutely silent. No birds sang. No insects made noise. The silence of a land where death was always close. She keyed her radio, a whisper so faint that it was barely audible. Iron Fist team in position, all personnel accounted for, standing by for coordination signal. Back at the command center, 3,000 miles away in San Diego, General Westbrook heard those words and nodded slowly. The operation was proceeding perfectly. The fighters were already in the air. Hassan Malik's days had just become finite. The moment Sarah's whispered words disappeared into the radio waves, the compound became the center of her entire universe. Everything else, the cold mountain air, the distant sound of an owl somewhere in the darkness, the weight of her rifle, the ache in her legs from the 12-kilometer trek, all of it faded into irrelevance. Her consciousness was now a singular beam of light focused entirely on the fortress below. Hassan Malik's compound had been built with military precision, likely by engineers who understood both offensive and defensive architecture. The main structure was a 3-story stone building with reinforced walls that looked like they could withstand sustained small arms fire. Around it, a perimeter wall stood approximately 4 meters high, topped with concertina wire that caught what little starlight existed and reflected it with menacing glints. Guard posts had been established at each corner of the compound, and intelligence suggested that Malik employed a security force of approximately 35 heavily armed men, many of them trained by Syrian military advisors and equipped with modern weaponry. Sarah's night vision goggles transformed the landscape into shades of green and black. Through the magnified lens, she could see details that would have been invisible to the naked eye. A guard was packing the eastern wall, moving with the repetitive rhythm of someone trying to stay awake during the boring hours of early morning watch. Another guard was visible through a window on the second floor, a thermal signature that indicated human body heat burning through the stone walls. The compound's main gate was secured with a heavy chain and what looked like a padlock, probably ornamental. The real security came from the armed men positioned behind it. To Sarah's left, Rodriguez was maintaining his position, his rifle similarly positioned on a stable rock formation. To her right, invisible in the darkness but present in her awareness, Martinez was doing the same. Johnson, Thompson, and Williams were distributed across the perimeter of their elevated observation point, each one responsible for monitoring a specific sector of approach. They had practiced this formation 1,000 times in training, and now they executed it with the perfection of musicians performing a symphony they'd rehearsed since childhood. The waiting was the most difficult part of any operation. Waiting required mental discipline that active combat didn't. During action, your body released adrenaline that carried you forward on instinct and training. But waiting required maintaining absolute focus while your nervous system screamed at you to do something, anything, to break the paralysis of anticipation. Sarah had learned to transform the waiting into a form of meditation. She used it as an opportunity to scan and rescan the compound, searching for vulnerabilities, contingencies, alternative approaches if the primary plan failed. Her mind was running through the operation sequence with the precision of a chess grandmaster thinking 10 moves ahead. The air assets would arrive at 2:47 a.m. The coordination signal would come through the radio. Her team would have exactly 3 minutes to move to the assault position before the window for air support would begin to close. Once they committed to the assault, there was no turning back, no second chances, no opportunity to say, actually, let's try this a different way tomorrow. This was it. The time on her tactical watch read 2:39 a.m., 8 minutes until the operation commenced. Sarah could feel her heart rate remaining steady at its baseline, a physiological marker of her complete control over her nervous system. Around her, the other operators were similarly composed. Years of training had taught them how to exist in this liminal space between preparation and action, suspended in time, waiting for the signal that would transform them from observers into warriors. Then the radio crackled. It wasn't the expected voice from the command center in San Diego. It was a different voice, younger, with the precise enunciation of someone trained in military radio protocol. The voice belonged to Lieutenant Commander Marcus Thompson, the lead pilot of the FA-18 Super Hornets that were currently screaming through the Afghan airspace at 450 miles per hour, their weapons systems armed and ready. Command, this is Striker 2 with Eagle Squadron. We have visual confirmation on the objective. Thermal imaging shows 16 heat signatures inside the compound, 3 additional signatures in the guard posts. External perimeter appears clear of civilians, awaiting go or no-go for coordinated strike. The voice was calm, professional, competent, but Sarah recognized something in that voice that most people wouldn't notice, a hint of adrenaline, a microsecond of hesitation before go or no-go. This pilot understood what was about to happen. He understood that the next 10 minutes would determine whether this operation was a triumphant success or a catastrophic failure. The command center responded immediately. Striker 2, this is command. You are cleared hot. All units confirm readiness for coordinated strike. Ground team advise status. This was the moment Sarah had been trained for her entire career. This was the instant where decision became action, where preparation became execution. She pressed the transmit button on her radio with a motion so controlled that it was almost imperceptible. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. Command, this is Iron Fist on the ground. All parameters optimal. Ground team is locked and loaded, ready to move to assault position, standing by for coordinated strike. For the first 0.7 seconds after Sarah transmitted those words, there was silence on the radio. That silence contained volumes. It represented the moment where multiple military systems, ground, air, intelligence, command authority, were synchronizing, where the last possible moment to abort the operation was passing, where the entire apparatus of American military force was being focused on a single point on the planet. Then the response came, and it came not from the command center but directly from the lead fighter pilot overhead. "Command, this is Striker 2. I read Iron Fist. Good to have you down there. We are 30 seconds from primary approach vector. Get your team ready to move." The words were casual, professional, exactly what you'd expect from a military pilot communicating with ground forces. But what neither the pilot nor anyone else in the operation, except for the highest level command authority, knew was that they were communicating with a woman. They were coordinating with Sarah Mitchell, the female SEAL who had spent 15 years proving that gender was irrelevant when it came to capability and competence. The pilot thought he was talking to a grizzled male veteran, one of the legendary figures of special operations. The pilot was actually talking to someone who had spent her entire career fighting against skepticism, against doubt, against the assumption that she wasn't good enough. Sarah's jaw tightened for exactly 1 millisecond, the only physical indication that she'd processed the significance of the pilot's words. Then she was focused again, completely present, completely centered. "Copy that, Striker 2. Ground team moving to assault position now. Will be in place for the final coordination in 90 seconds. She raised her hand, a gesture that was invisible in the darkness but which she knew every member of her team would understand. They'd rehearsed this moment hundreds of times. The hand signal meant, move, now, assault formation, execute. The team moved with the synchronization of a single organism. Rodriguez came first, moving down the rocky slope toward the compound with careful, controlled speed. The assault wasn't a charge, it was a tactical advance, each operator moving while covering, providing overlapping fields of fire, making sure that no enemy could engage them without being immediately engaged in return. Martinez followed Rodriguez. Johnson covered their approach. Thompson and Williams moved along the northern perimeter, approaching from a different angle to create a crossfire situation that would devastate any defenders who tried to establish a fighting position. Sarah moved last, her rifle up, her eyes constantly scanning for threats. She could see the Afghan compound now not as an abstract tactical objective, but as a real structure filled with real people who wanted to kill her and her team. The intelligence suggested Hassan Malik was somewhere inside that building. The intelligence had been right before. The intelligence had better be right now. The radio crackled again. "Iron Fist, this is Striker 2. I have your thermal signature. You're moving hot. Very nice formation. We're in overwatch position. You have weapons hot. Cleared to engage all hostile signatures inside the perimeter." This was it. This was the moment of no return. Sarah's team was now less than 100 meters from the compound, moving in assault formation, with fighter jets overhead providing surveillance and ready to unleash devastating firepower if anything went wrong. Sarah keyed her radio one final time. "Striker 2, Iron Fist. All units moving to breach position. We go hot in 60 seconds. The night around the Afghan compound was about to become something that Hassan Malik would never forget, or more likely, wouldn't survive to remember. In the cockpit of the lead FA-18 Super Hornet, Lieutenant Commander Marcus Thompson's hands rested with practiced ease on the flight control stick. The aircraft was screaming through the Afghan airspace at 480 miles per hour, altitude 8,000 feet, heading 247 degrees, velocity locked into the precise vectors calculated by the mission planners back at Naval Base San Diego. Through his canopy, the landscape below was rendered in shades of thermal orange and blue by the advanced targeting system that fed directly into his heads-up display. It was a view that most human beings would never see. The world transformed into pure data, pure tactical information stripped of color and emotion. Behind Thompson, in the weapons officer's seat, sat Captain James Rodriguez, no relation to the ground team operator of the same name, monitoring the systems that could deliver devastating firepower in microseconds. To Thompson's right, flying in perfect formation, was his wingman, Captain Elena Vasquez, one of the most skilled pilots in the entire carrier air wing. Behind Vasquez came two additional Super Hornets, flown by experienced pilots who had logged thousands of hours in combat zones across 3 continents. Thompson had been flying combat missions for 12 years. He'd flown close air support for operations in Iraq, in Syria, in the mountains of Pakistan. He provided gun runs for Navy SEAL teams before, more times than he could count. But there was something different about this operation. The coordination was tighter. The intelligence was more current. The ground team commander had a reputation that preceded them even in military circles where legends were common. "Stryker 2 copies ground team," Thompson transmitted, his voice modulated through decades of training to sound completely calm and professional. "I have your thermal signature. You're moving hot. Very nice formation. We're in overwatch position. You have weapons hot, cleared to engage all hostile signatures inside the perimeter." As the words left his mouth, Thompson's mind was running through the tactical scenario with practiced precision. The compound below was now illuminated in his targeting system like a video game rendered in thermal vision. The guards in the corner tower. The 2 men packing the eastern wall. The heat signatures inside the building that represented the sleeping quarters where, according to intelligence, Hassan Malik was supposed to be located. Everything was there, everything was visible, everything was calculable. What Thompson didn't know, and what almost no one outside of the highest levels of command authority knew, was the identity of the ground team commander he was supporting. The call sign Iron Fist was famous throughout military circles. It had been mentioned in classified briefings, discussed in pilot lounges, analyzed in tactical training sessions as an example of flawless operational execution. But the assumption, the universal assumption held by Thompson and every other pilot who'd heard that call sign, was that Iron Fist was a man. A grizzled veteran, probably in his mid-40s, probably someone who'd fought in multiple theaters, probably someone whose name and face were known to the upper echelons of the Pentagon. The Pentagon's decision to keep Sarah Mitchell's identity classified at the highest levels was deliberate and strategic. Not because of operational security. Her capability spoke for itself, and enemy intelligence would figure out who she was eventually anyway. The classification was designed to protect her from the political firestorm that would inevitably erupt if the American public learned that the female commander of Navy SEAL Team 6 had just led the operation that captured Hassan Malik. The military establishment was still struggling with the reality of women in combat roles. Generals still whispered in private about whether women had the psychological capacity for command under fire. Politicians still made speeches about protecting women while simultaneously using female soldiers as propaganda tools for international diplomacy. Sarah Mitchell had learned to operate in this contradiction. She was simultaneously revolutionary and invisible. Her presence in the military was pushing boundaries and breaking barriers, but her identity had to remain hidden to prevent the very barrier breaking from becoming a political liability. It was a paradox that would have driven most people insane, but Sarah had accepted it as the price of doing what she loved. In his FA-18, Thompson continued monitoring the tactical display as the ground team approached the compound. He could see the 5 thermal signatures of the assault team moving in perfect formation toward the objective. The way they moved, the precision of their spacing, the coordination of their approach, it was beautiful. It was art. It was the result of thousands of hours of training and dozens of actual combat operations refined into pure tactical perfection. "Iron Fist, this is Stryker 2, Thompson transmitted. All units moving to breach position. We go hot in 60 seconds. Primary targets are designated. Secondary targets are locked. You have full clearance to engage. We're watching your back." There was a moment of silence, and then the response came back. "Striker 2, Iron Fist. Copy all. Ground team breaching in 60 seconds. Maintain overwatch. If anything goes sideways, we're counting on you to even the odds." Thompson felt something shift in his chest at those words. There was absolute confidence in that voice. Absolute certainty. It was the voice of someone who had done this 100 times before, who had seen every possible scenario and had a response protocol prepared for each one. Thompson had flown support for dozens of SEAL operations, and he'd learned to recognize the difference between courage and competence. Courage was when someone faced danger despite being afraid. Competence was when someone faced danger because they'd trained so thoroughly that they didn't need to be afraid. The voice on the radio represented pure, undiluted competence. In the weapons officer's seat behind Thompson, Rodriguez was monitoring the communication frequencies. He'd heard the exchange, and like Thompson, his assumption was that he was supporting a seasoned male veteran. Both men understood that they were providing air support to one of the most accomplished operators in the entire SEAL community. Both men also understood that their role was crucial. If the ground team got pinned down, if they encountered resistance heavier than anticipated, it would be the FA-18s that would provide the firepower to break the enemy's will to fight. Elena Vasquez, flying in the right-wing position, heard the exchange as well. She was one of the very few women pilots in the carrier air wing, had fought her own battles against skepticism and dismissiveness, though her struggles had been somewhat less pronounced than they would have been a decade earlier. When she heard the voice of Iron Fist on the radio, she felt a moment of connection. She recognized the cadence of someone who had fought against the same prejudices, who had proven themselves through sheer capability and competence. But she didn't know, because there was no way she could have known, that the person she was supporting was also a woman. The Pentagon's classification kept that secret as tightly held as a nuclear launch code. Thompson began adjusting his approach vector, positioning his aircraft to provide optimal coverage of the compound and surrounding terrain. His wingman mirrored the maneuver perfectly. The two additional fighters took up secondary positions that would allow them to provide close air support if the ground team needed immediate firepower. The coordination between air and ground elements was executing perfectly, a testament to the months of planning and rehearsal that had gone into this operation. As the timer on Thompson's heads-up display clicked down toward the moment of assault, he was conscious of the historical significance of what was about to happen. Hassan Malik had evaded the world's greatest military for 7 years. He'd orchestrated attacks that had killed thousands. Intelligence agencies from a dozen countries had been hunting him. And now, in the next few minutes, a ground team was going to assault his compound while air support watched overhead. Thompson keyed his radio one final time. "Iron Fist, Striker 2. 30 seconds to assault window. All air assets are green. Your move, Commander." The response came back immediately. "Striker 2, Iron Fist. Ground team is 30 meters from breach point. We go hot in 15 seconds. Stay alert." Thompson watched his thermal display as the 5 heat signatures of the ground team moved into final assault position. He saw them pause just for a moment, and he knew what was happening. They were confirming weapons, doing final equipment checks, preparing themselves mentally for the transition from approach to assault. Then he saw them move again, and he knew it was happening. The operation was commencing. What Thompson didn't understand in that moment, what he would never fully comprehend unless someone told him, was that the commander leading that assault from the ground was a woman who had spent her entire life proving that gender was irrelevant when it came to courage, competence, and the capacity to lead. She was a revolutionary who had to remain invisible, a barrier breaker whose very existence had to be classified, a legend who couldn't be publicly acknowledged. But among those who knew, Among the elite circles of military command, Sarah Mitchell was already becoming something beyond human myth. She was becoming the standard by which all future leaders would be measured. And from his aircraft overhead, providing overwatch and ready to rain fire on any enemy who threatened her, Marcus Thompson was about to become part of her legend without ever knowing her face. The compound's main gate exploded inward in a controlled demolition that Sarah had calculated to the millimeter. The shaped charge that Rodriguez had placed took out the padlock and chain in a burst of controlled violence. The gate swung open with a metallic shriek, revealing the courtyard beyond. In that microsecond of exposure, Martinez lobbed a stun grenade through the opening, a non-lethal device designed to disorient defenders rather than kill them. Sarah wanted Hassan Malik alive. Dead, he became a martyr. Alive, he became a prisoner who could be interrogated, who could provide intelligence that would save thousands of lives. The stun grenade detonated with a noise like thunder and a flash of light that registered even through the night vision goggles, causing momentary disorientation to anyone looking in that direction. It was precisely timed. In the 1.3 seconds it took for the initial defenders to recover from the sensory overload, Sarah's team was already moving. Rodriguez breached first, his rifle up, his movement flowing from the tactical approach into the assault like water following a predetermined channel. The guard post to the left of the gate had two occupants, both of them momentarily stunned by the explosion. Rodriguez engaged them with professional precision. 2 shots, both center mass. Both guards went down before they could even register what was happening. Their rifles clattered to the stone courtyard, and Rodriguez was already moving past them, establishing a secondary defensive position that covered Johnson's approach. Martinez came through the gate next, moving in a different vector, his rifle sweeping across the courtyard's eastern sector. A guard emerged from behind a stone pillar, weapon raised. Martinez's training took over. He didn't hesitate, didn't think about the moral calculus of the moment. The guard had made a choice to defend Hassan Malik. That choice had consequences. 2 shots. The guard fell. Thompson and Williams were moving up the western flank, their weapons covering the upper windows of the compound. Sarah could see, through the thermal display that was being fed into her tactical headpiece from the aircraft overhead, that there were heat signatures moving inside the building on the second floor. The defenders were responding to the breach. They were organizing. They were preparing to mount a counterattack. "Striker 2, Iron Fist," Sarah transmitted, her voice absolutely calm despite the fact that she was now moving through the gate herself, her rifle up, her eyes scanning for threats. "We have contact. Multiple signatures organizing on the second floor. Recommend suppressive fire on the upper level to keep them from establishing a fighting position." In the FA-18 overhead, Thompson heard the request with absolute clarity. The ground team commander was asking for something specific, not an airstrike, not anything that would risk civilian casualties or destroy the building, but suppressive fire. A demonstration of force designed to convince the defenders that mounting a conventional defense was suicide. Thompson's hands moved across his weapons system with the precision of a concert pianist. The targeting computer locked onto the calculated firing position. The 20mm rotary cannon that was mounted in his aircraft was one of the most devastating weapons systems ever created. In a single second, it could fire 6,000 rounds. Thompson didn't need 6,000 rounds. He needed to make a point. "Iron Fist, Striker 2. Suppressive fire on upper level west wing. Stand by." The FA-18 banked into a shallow dive, and the cannon came alive. The sound that erupted from Thompson's aircraft wasn't something that could be easily described. It was a roar like an angry god, a noise that seemed to come from the earth itself. Rounds the size of a man's fist tore through the upper-level windows of Malik's compound, destroying walls, destroying furniture, destroying the fighting positions that the defenders were attempting to establish. Inside the compound, the effect was immediate and catastrophic. The psychological impact of having a modern military jet unleashing fire from the sky was enough to break the will of even experienced fighters. The defenders on the second floor abandoned their positions and retreated deeper into the structure, seeking shelter from the aerial assault. Sarah used that moment of disruption perfectly. She raised her hand, and Johnson and Thompson began their approach to the main entrance of the compound. The entrance doors were heavy wooden structures reinforced with steel bands. A normal approach would have been suicidal, but Sarah's team didn't use a normal approach. Johnson fired a shaped charge at the doors. The explosion was smaller and more focused than the one at the gate, designed specifically to compromise the structural integrity of the doors without causing unnecessary collateral damage. The doors burst open like they were made of paper. Sarah was through the opening in 0.4 seconds, her rifle up, her night vision goggles transforming the interior of the compound into a landscape of thermal information and tactical opportunity. A defender emerged from a side corridor. Sarah's training took over. She didn't feel fear or hesitation. She'd trained this moment 1,000 times. One shot. The defender fell. Rodriguez was already moving up the interior staircase, Thompson covering his approach from a secondary position. Martinez was clearing the ground floor, moving systematically through each room, making sure there were no defenders positioned to ambush the team from behind. Williams was establishing a defensive position at the entrance, ready to engage any counterattack coming from outside. The interior of the compound was chaos and precision simultaneously. Radio traffic was constant but controlled, each operator reporting their sector status in calm, professional tones. First floor clear. Second floor has 3 signatures, northeast corner. Basement access located, proceeding with caution. The team moved through the structure with the efficiency of a well-choreographed ballet, each operator knowing exactly where the others were, exactly what the plan was, exactly what they needed to do. Then Sarah heard it through her radio, the call she'd been waiting for. Iron Fist Rodriguez, 3rd floor, I have visual on the target, positive identification. Hassan Malik is here. Sarah's heart rate remained exactly 60 beats per minute. Everything had gone exactly according to plan. The aerial suppressive fire had prevented the defenders from establishing a coherent defense. The breach had been flawless. The assault had proceeded with mathematical precision. And now, in the master bedroom on the 3rd floor of his compound, Hassan Malik, the man who'd evaded the world's greatest military for 7 years, was about to be taken into custody. Copy Rodriguez, Sarah transmitted. Secure the target, non-lethal apprehension if possible. We need him alive. What happened next was something that would be discussed in military training academies for decades. Rodriguez, with Thompson covering his approach, breached the bedroom where Hassan Malik was attempting to escape through a window. Instead of a firefight, it was a brief struggle. Malik was unarmed, attempting to flee rather than fight. Rodriguez moved with controlled violence, neutralizing the threat while keeping him alive. Within seconds, Hassan Malik was restrained, his hands zip-tied behind his back, a tactical gag placed in his mouth to prevent him from biting or speaking. Sarah moved to the 3rd floor and confirmed the capture personally. She looked at Hassan Malik's face, the man she'd been studying in intelligence briefings for months, and saw something that surprised her. Not a fierce warrior, not a demonic figure orchestrating global terrorism. Just a man who'd made choices that had cost thousands of lives, but still just a man. Malik is secured, Sarah transmitted to the command center back in San Diego. All primary objectives achieved, preparing for extraction. Striker 2, your suppressive fire was perfect. You kept them off balance long enough for us to get inside without heavy casualties. Thompson heard the words and felt a moment of profound satisfaction. The ground team commander was acknowledging the air team's contribution. That was the mark of a true leader, understanding that victory was achieved through coordination, through different elements of the military working in perfect synchronization. The extraction sequence was swift and efficient. Sarah's team moved back through the compound, securing intelligence documents that had been located in Malik's office, confirming that 3 additional terrorist operatives had been captured alive, ensuring that no one was left behind. The entire operation from breach to extraction had taken less than 12 minutes. As they moved toward the extraction point, Sarah looked back at the compound one final time. The building was damaged but not destroyed. The intelligence value was preserved. The captured operatives would provide information that would disrupt terrorist networks across 3 continents. Hassan Malik's capability to orchestrate attacks had been completely eliminated. Above them, Thompson's FA-18 maintained overwatch position, watching the team retreat toward the waiting helicopters. The operation was a complete success. What no one in the operation knew, what would remain classified at the highest levels, was that this victory, this perfect execution of one of the most complex military operations in recent history, had been achieved under the command of a woman named Sarah Mitchell, a woman whose name would never appear in any public document, a woman whose face would never be on the news, a woman who was, at that very moment, becoming a legend. The transport helicopters descended through the Afghan darkness, with the precision of machines that had made this exact approach 1,000 times before. Sarah and her team stood in the cargo hold, still wearing their tactical gear, still damp with sweat and dust, still operating in that heightened state of awareness that combat operations created. Hassan Malik was secured in the center of the helicopter, heavily restrained, his eyes covered with a blindfold to prevent him from gathering intelligence about the extraction route. Around him, armed guards maintained constant surveillance, weapons ready for any attempt at escape. Sarah's face remained impassive as the helicopter lifted off from the extraction point. The compound below, the place that had been their objective for months of planning and preparation, was now receding into the darkness. Fire was burning in one section of the building where a stray round had ignited some structural materials. The defending force had been completely neutralized. 3 enemy combatants had been killed. 8 had been captured. 0 SEAL team casualties. The intelligence documents secured from Malik's office were already being photographed and analyzed by the intelligence team that had been standing by for this exact purpose. Rodriguez sat across from Sarah, his face streaked with dust and sweat, his eyes still vibrating with the adrenaline that lingered even as the immediate danger had passed. He caught Sarah's eye and gave her a nod, the universal gesture of a warrior acknowledging another warrior's excellence. Sarah nodded back, a gesture that said, "You performed perfectly. Every single one of you was flawless." But beyond that subtle acknowledgement, Sarah's expression revealed nothing. Her training had taught her that the moment between combat and debriefing was when operators were most vulnerable to emotional overwhelm. By maintaining her controlled demeanor, she was giving her team permission to do the same. Martinez was already beginning the after-action checklist, methodically accounting for every piece of equipment, every weapon, every piece of intelligence that they'd extracted from the compound. Johnson and Thompson were reviewing the tactical sequence in their minds, identifying what had worked perfectly and what could be improved in future operations. Williams was monitoring the prisoners, the 8 operatives they'd captured alive, making sure none of them were attempting to communicate with each other or planning any kind of coordinated action. 2 hours later, Sarah sat in a debriefing room at the forward operating base, surrounded by intelligence analysts, tactical commanders, and representatives from the Pentagon's command structure. A 3-star general who'd been flown in on a special aircraft specifically for this purpose was nodding as Sarah delivered her after-action report. Every detail was documented. Every decision was explained. Every variable was analyzed. "Absolutely textbook operation, Commander," the general said when Sarah finished her report. "Your coordination with naval aviation was flawless. The intelligence officers are already going through the documents from Malik's office, and we're finding information that's going to disrupt terrorist networks across 3 continents. You've accomplished what 7 years of hunting couldn't achieve." Sarah acknowledged the compliment with a slight inclination of her head. "Sir, the success belonged to the entire team. The air support was essential. Without Striker 2's suppressive fire, we would have encountered significantly heavier resistance on the upper floors." The general smiled slightly. "That's the mark of a true commander, Mitchell. But let's be clear, this operation succeeds or fails based on the ground team commander's capability. You executed flawlessly." What the general didn't say, what couldn't be said in any official capacity, was that Sarah had just become something more than a military commander. She had become a symbol, a breaking point for everything the Pentagon had been struggling with for decades regarding women in combat roles. But that significance had to remain unspoken. The classification remained absolute. Her identity would be protected. Her name would not appear in any public documents. The credit would go to the team. The credit would go to the air assets. The credit would go to the intelligence community. But in the quiet circles of the Pentagon, in the classified briefing rooms where the senior leadership of the military discussed operations in the highest levels of confidence, Sarah Mitchell's name would become synonymous with tactical perfection. 24 hours later, Sarah stood in the shower of her quarters at Naval Base San Diego, watching the dust and sweat and blood of the operation wash away down the drain. The water was hot, the first hot shower she'd had in days, and for exactly 5 minutes, she allowed herself to simply exist in the physical sensation of being alive and successful, and having brought her entire team home without casualties. Her mother had called, her sister had texted. Neither of them knew what Sarah had accomplished. Neither of them would ever know. They would see news reports about Hassan Malik's capture, but they would never know that their daughter, their sister, had been the one who orchestrated that capture. They would never be able to tell their friends, "My sister led the operation that got Malik." That knowledge had to remain locked away, classified at a level that only the highest-ranking government officials would ever understand. Sarah dried off and put on fresh clothes. Her quarters were modest, a small bedroom, a living room, a kitchenette. On her desk was a photograph of her and her father, taken when she was 16 years old. It had been taken the day before he'd told her, for the last time, that she'd never be strong enough for the military. He died 5 years later, never knowing that his daughter had become one of the most accomplished operators in the entire SEAL community. Sarah picked up the photograph and looked at it for a long moment. "I proved you wrong, Dad," she whispered to the image. "I hope you know that somehow." She placed the photograph back on her desk and began writing her official report. Every detail of the operation had to be documented. Every decision had to be justified. Every tactical choice had to be explained. The report would go into classified files that might not be declassified for 50 years. Future military strategists would study her decisions, would analyze her approach, would use her operation as a template for similar missions. Over the next week, Sarah attended debriefings with the CIA. She reviewed footage of the operation with military strategists. She participated in an after-action analysis with the pilots of Eagle Squadron. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Thompson came to San Diego for the debrief, and Sarah had the strange experience of sitting across a table from the pilot who'd provided air support for her operation, both of them discussing the tactical coordination, both of them professional and formal, neither of them understanding the full historical significance of what they'd accomplished together. "Your ground team coordination was excellent," Thompson said, and Sarah could see the professional respect in his eyes. "I've provided air support for a lot of SEAL operations, but Iron Fist is something special. That commander knows how to execute." Sarah allowed herself a brief smile. "Thank you, sir. Your suppressive fire was instrumental. You gave us the window we needed." What Thompson didn't know, what he would never know unless someone in the Pentagon eventually decided to declassify the operation, was that Iron Fist had a face. Iron Fist was a woman named Sarah Mitchell, who was sitting across from him at that very moment. Thompson had unknowingly worked with one of the most accomplished military leaders of her generation, and he had no idea. 3 months later, Sarah was back in the mountains of Afghanistan, leading another operation. Then another one after that. She'd proven herself so thoroughly, so completely, that new recruits to SEAL Team 6 were being told about her accomplishments, though always with the caveat that her identity was classified and couldn't be discussed outside of official military channels. The call sign, Iron Fist, had transformed from being a name that made people whisper and wonder to being a standard by which all future operators would be measured. The Pentagon's press office released a brief statement about Hassan Malik's capture, crediting an elite special operations team working in coordination with naval aviation. The statement was vague, deliberately so. The news media tried to identify the specific SEAL team that had conducted the operation, but official channels remained silent. The only information released was that the operation had been successful, that the target had been captured alive, and that intelligence gathered from the compound was already disrupting terrorist networks. Sarah Mitchell went to work every morning the same way she went to every briefing and every operation, with complete professionalism and absolute focus. She trained her team. She planned operations. She executed missions with the precision that had become her trademark, but her name remained classified. Her face remained unknown to the public. Her story remained untold. And yet, among those who mattered, among the operators who'd served under her command, among the pilots who'd provided air support for her missions, among the highest echelons of military command, she was a legend, a living legend, an operator whose capability transcended gender and challenged everything that the military establishment had assumed about leadership and combat effectiveness. Sarah Mitchell went home that night, like every other night. She had dinner alone in her apartment. She reviewed classified documents on her secure computer. She went to bed early, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new missions, new opportunities to prove that capability was the only metric that mattered. The world would never know her name. The world would never know that the operation that captured Hassan Malik, the operation that disrupted terrorist networks across 3 continents, the operation that saved countless lives, had been led by a woman. But that was the price she paid for being revolutionary. That was the cost of breaking barriers that society wasn't ready to acknowledge being broken. And Sarah Mitchell had long ago decided that the cost was worth paying. She was a warrior. She was a leader. She was the legacy of every woman who'd been told she wasn't strong enough, who'd been doubted, who'd been underestimated. And she carried that legacy silently, invisibly, with the absolute conviction that the only recognition that mattered was the one that came from people who truly understood what she'd accomplished. In classified briefing rooms, in military academies, in the minds of the soldiers who'd fought under her command, Iron Fist would be remembered as a legend. But Sarah Mitchell would go on, mission after mission, achievement after achievement, her name remaining classified, her face remaining hidden, her identity remaining protected. Because that was who she was, not a symbol, not a political statement, not a barrier breaker fighting for recognition, just a soldier, just a warrior, just a woman who decided that being the best was more important than being known. And in the end, that was the greatest achievement of all. The end.